Let's bring in Negar Mortazavi from Washington, D.C. She's a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and the host of the Iran podcast. Negar, thank you so much for joining us. Where are we in this conflict right now? Because both sides have different strategic goals, chiefly surrounding the Strait of Hormuz, which are actually diametrically opposite.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the Memorandum of Misunderstanding from both sides. It's an important document signed by both presidents with lots of very important issues, essentially in the format of short bullet points, short paragraphs. And each of these needs, a lot more details to be understood exactly from both sides. For example, the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian understanding is we agreed to open it toll-free, but with coordination, which means we need to know who's passing, what's the cargo, etc. The U.S. tried to force open a separate lane from the Omani side, saying this is what their understanding of opening of the Strait of Hormuz is. But what the Iranian side is trying to achieve here, I think, is sort of going back to the point-by-point in the MOU, which includes ending the war on all fronts, including Lebanon, which is mentioned in the first point, having their control or at least coordination over the Strait of Hormuz, and then long-term some form of cooperation with Oman and potentially other regional actors, and then, of course, some form of economic relief in the form of releasing their frozen assets and then sanctions relief. And it's just not very clear if Washington, President Trump, is willing to abide by those. It was mentioned in the MOU, but it wasn't really implemented. That's Tehran's complaint.
Now, when we know what sort of pressures Donald Trump is under, given Republicans were rather critical of that MOU, and certainly Democrats would be naturally anyway. But what about Iran here as well? What does all this say about the power dynamics within the Iranian administration and the shuffling there taking place, arguably, and who's trying to, at the moment, gain the upper hand?
Well, we know that the more hardline voices, well, first of all, the military commanders are in charge. This is wartime in Iran. It's not peacetime. And you have a lot of presence at the decision-making table with the IRGC and other commanders. Top leaders in the country, including the supreme leader, had been assassinated at the opening of the war. There's been a lot of casualty and destruction on the Iranian side. So it's difficult to compare Washington, which is essentially right here at peacetime, launching a war thousands of miles away, and the Iranians were actually living it because the war is where they are. But decision-making is different than it was before the war had launched. Top leaders are still under the fear of assassinations and targeting. They can't meet as they do regularly. Decisions are not as transparent. And there's a lot of debate within the system. But then at the end of the day, what you see coming, I think, is more streamlined that Washington wants to believe. There's a lot of talk here that they're divided and decision-making is not very clear. That's not very much the case. The Supreme National Security Council, IRGC commanders, of course, the president, speaker of parliament, and then, of course, the supreme leader on top of all of these are sort of making the decisions as part of a group. And that's what we see as Iranian policy and strategy being implemented.
How is the balance of power here between the two countries changing? I mean, it's quite obvious that the U.S. is vastly stronger militarily, but ultimately it's strong enough. It's not really strong enough to keep Iran from using its military means to reclose the strait as it wishes. And the strait is right at the nub of everything right now.
Absolutely. I think months of war has shown that there's no military solution. First of all, let's remind everyone that the Strait of Hormuz wasn't even a problem before this war started. It was wide open and there was traffic, international traffic. And this war created that problem without solving any other problems like Iran's nuclear program, etc. And the U.S., yes, this is the mightiest army in human history, if you just look at it kinetically, but this war has shown the limits of American hard power, and it had been shown in previous wars in Afghanistan, way before that in Vietnam, because war is not just fought with hard power, there's also geography. There's Iran's advantage as the home team, essentially defending their homeland. Their resolve, the Iranians top leaders are dying and still continuing and not giving up. They're defending what they see as sovereignty, independence, not surrendering or capitulating to this bigger power who's coming from thousands of miles away. And then, of course, their strategic advantage and just in big picture strategy, because on the U.S. side, what seems to be lacking is a long-term strategy. What is the strategy of this war? Why does the U.S. keep repeating the same problems, flaring up the hot conflict, thinking that this time it would be different? I don't think it will be different. Again, we will probably come to a conclusion sooner than later that there is no military solution out of this, and it has to go back to the negotiating table. But then there will also be no absolute winner in the war. Of course, Iranians have endured a lot of damage to civilian infrastructure, lots of death. And then on the U.S. side, there can't be an absolute winner in the way that President Trump likes to portray himself.
Negar, thank you so much. Negar Mortazavi there joining us from Washington. She's a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and the host of the Iran podcast.